All right. Good evening, Thunder Wizards, here in Southern California. It is just beginning evening. The sun just went down a little while ago. We are going to talk about, I mean, it looks like I'm going to launch into some political, religious thing. That's really not my intention. Um, and I know, the good thing for the channel is it's probably going to get a lot of attention from you know, people who are looking to get into all that crazy drama about socialism and communism and Christianity and all that. But I want to go a step further than that. So hopefully you can hear past all of that, that you can get past all of your fear, that you can get past all of your jingoism and nationalism and your religious garbage and hear what it is I'm trying to talk to you about, which is how to be empowered, what true spirituality is, what true spirituality has always been. And over the past 2,000 years, we have been living under an imposed mindset, which has gone so deep into our culture that it has gone into the collective unconscious. And I want to reveal that to you. That's really what my goal here is today, is to reveal to you the slavery that you take with you, that you've been born with, that has been programmed into you, that's been educated into you about how to be a slave. And that Christianity is a religion of slavery. And so we'll talk about that. And I'm going to show you from the Bible itself, from the New Testament, specifically, how Christianity was among the first communist mindsets. And even though that the communism that we see in the New Testament, even though it's not practiced in our, it's not practiced in our, the way that we deal with money. Even though Christianity is associated with capitalism, it still creates people who operate from mindsets that are similar to communism, and I'm going to share that with you. So this is a live Q&A. If you're new to the channel, I should probably keep my eyes on this so that I can watch what's going on. This is a Q&A. How many people do we have? We only have 23. So this is a Q&A. That means I would like for you to ask questions. The way you ask a question is you write question and then you formulate an intelligent question with a subject and an object and a verb and all that. And then you write it and I'll answer it. If you want to, especially with this one, if we get people wanting to spout their opinions on communism and socialism and all that, I'm going to mute you because that's not what we're here to do. We're here to really talk about how to gain power from a spiritual perspective. So I kind of lost what I was going to say, so I'm going to get my notes up here, which will help me. So here's the thing that we don't understand now. First off, let me give you some background on Christianity in terms of your identity, who you are. If you're raised in the Western world, especially European cultures, whether that be the United States or Europe or Britain or other places like that, you have been raised and taught to believe, whether you realize it or not. You have been raised and taught to believe that you are descended from the 12 tribes of Israel. And so in your mind, whether you realize it or not, your history, especially if you were a church-going person like I was as a kid. I went to, a lot of Baptist church. But you've been taught to believe that your ancestors are Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and that your ancestors came out of bondage of Egypt and all that. Now, you may not consciously make that. Consciously, if you were to think about it, you would go, oh, yeah, no, whatever your ethnicity is, which is most likely not directly from that. You go, no, but on an unconscious level, on a cultural level, you believe that. In fact, one of the things that I found most disturbing in college, and I was going to a Christian college at the time, when I started reading history, specifically the accounts of the settlers that were coming from England and the first time that they hit American soil. And I remember reading one account of some guy as he was still on the ship, hadn't even got off the ship. The ship was just hitting the sand somewhere on the East Coast. And in the forest, he sees some Native American guy peeking out from behind a tree, like, what the hell is that? Who are these people? What the hell? And the first thing they do before they get off the ship is they start firing their muskets. They don't even bother to like get out and say, hey, can we talk? They just start firing their muskets at these people who live there in their own land, right? They just start shooting at them. And the justification for it was, because it was really just deeply embedded in this, this person's writing, was that they were the children of Israel and those were the not the Palestinians, but the Sodomites or the Edomites. They looked at them that way, that they actually saw themselves as creating the new Jerusalem, and they were going off of that mythology. They really honestly believed that. I remember growing up in Baptist churches as a kid. And, when you read about, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and all that, it was put into you that those were your ancestors. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not getting into an ethnic thing. That's not what I'm trying to do here. This isn't an ethnic, white people only thing. If that's your thing, please go somewhere else because I will slice you to pieces. What I'm trying to get at is that the stories in the Bible have been presented as history. Let me go a little bit further. So if somebody were to ask you, what is the history? What is your history? What is your family history? Right? You might be able to go back a few generations. You might even be able to go back and know, okay, well, I can't, like, for instance, my family came to the United States way back when in the 1600s, came from England. Okay, so England, blah, 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 and you can take yourself back. And then all of a sudden, after you get past the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, what ends up happening? Try to take your history back further than the Middle Ages. You won't be able to do it. Because what will happen is your mind will immediately go to either Greece or to Mesopotamia. This is how we've been taught, and this is because I'm pretty sure school is pretty much the same. When I was going to school, you had history, and history would talk about the American Revolution and go back into this and that and the Battle of Hastings and the thing and the that and the blah, blah, blah. And then you end up talking about the Roman Empire, and then you go further back and you talk about Greece. And then you go further back from Greece and you talk about Mesopotamia. And then you realize that the class is not called history. It's called Western history or Western Civ, which is the history of Western civilization. So what that means is that we have our idea of history, who we are, based on what? Based on civilization. And what is civilization? Civilization is empires. When you go to history class, they're not teaching you about the history of human beings. They're teaching you about the history of empires. And you have this belief, because they'll say Western civilization or European civilization, and they'll go to Greece. Or they'll even go back to the Akkadians and the Babylonians. Where that, at the time that Greece was happening, if you happen to be from Europe, if your parents are from Europe, Northern Europe, they weren't at all in the same spot, doing the same things as Greece. Completely different worlds. Okay. All right, so once again, please hold off on any comments. I only want questions. Uh, hold off on the comments if you can, and just only ask questions, and I'll be happy to answer those. This is a live Q&A. It's not a back and forth. Okay, so anyway, you've probably heard me talk about this a bunch of different times, but I just want you to tap into that awareness. The awareness is that what you've been taught about who you are and where you came from is not linked to actual chronological history. It is linked to the development of empires. And empires and spirituality do not go together. If you are going to become the emperor of something, if you're going to create an empire, you do not want people to have a spiritual practice, because spirituality is designed to empower you. It is designed to give you determination over how your life unfolds. It is there to give you power to know how to interact with, if you want to believe in fate and karma, how to interact with them in such a way where you evolve and you become empowered. And later on, I'm going to share with you the difference between how we think now in terms of creating our life, which is a direct result of the Christian mindset, the imperial mindset, the anti-religion mindset, and what our ancestors believed. And I'm going to, it's a tough, it's a tough subject to talk about, because when I do, the racists are going to start pumping their fists and they're going to miss the point. But I'm going to do it anyway because it's a valuable histories. So before we do that, let's talk about where in the Bible communism is, and that it is undoubtedly there. Now, Christian apologists, if you ask them, was early Christianity communist? They are going to start to tell you why that's not true. But they trip all over themselves because they can't deny the reality that it's written there in black and white. But I'm going to show you in that, it's going to show the purpose of it. The purpose of Christianity / communism in terms of culture, in terms of how we live in a community. So as I said earlier, Christianity was developed as a way to destroy spirituality. Communism, if we look at it as a political tool, is designed to destroy individuality. And the reason for that is that individuality gives you power. And if you have power, you may potentially, especially if you're not a spiritual person, if you don't believe, this is why communists are atheists, because if you don't believe in spirituality, then you live in an arbitrary, cruel, unfair universe. And so communism, the justification for it is that we create equality. You do that by destroying individuality. And so you no longer have individuals, but you have the state. You have this one entity called the state. Okay? So Christianity as a religion is designed to destroy spirituality. Communism is designed to destroy individuality and to destroy your personal identity. Both Christianity and communism are designed to destroy your personal identity. How do I know this? Well, because you're supposed to, as a Christian, carry your cross. You're supposed to carry your burden. You're supposed to die to yourself. You're supposed to ask what is God's will for you, and you cannot have your own will because that is idolatry. You must subsume your will to God's will. And this is a big deal. Even if you're not a Christian, I guarantee you, if you're not a Christian and you're not religious, you still have this belief that your job is to find God's will. You may use other words for it, like what I'm supposed to do or what I'm destined to do or any of those kinds of things. right? All right, so again, Lucifer, Apollo, guys, please hold off on the comments. Okay, let's wait for the questions. All right, so let us now go straight to the Bible. First, before I do that, let me ask you the difference between, we're going to talk about the difference between, hang on one second here. We are going to talk about the difference between fascism and communism. It's supposed to be right and left, right? Fascism is supposed to be on the extreme ultra-right, which is what people on the left of politics, people who represent the right side of politics, they call them fascists. And when fascists don't like liberals, they call them socialists or communists. But what is the end result of both of those kinds of politics? They're exactly the same. It's an illusion that fascism and communism are different. They're not. They're not different. Communism ends up with dictators. Look at South Korea. South Korea is, one of the last remaining communist states in the world, and Kim Jong-un is an absolute dictator with complete authority. In fact, he is worshipped. I believe his father was believed to not poop or piss. So there's no difference. This idea that fascism and communism are right and left, it's the same. It's total control, and the masses don't have any power. You're not allowed to have any individuality. And that is true in both fascism and communism. There might be slight differences, but it ends up the same. You've got a tyrant running everything. Or you've got the elite running everything and owning everything. It's the same thing. So let's go to the Bible. In case you're not familiar, that the Bible actually teaches, the New Testament, I can go into the Old Testament too, but the New Testament teaches very clearly that Christianity and the true followers of Jesus were supposed to be communists from the beginning. So let's read this. This is from Acts 32. Acts 32. All the believers were one in heart and mind. No one claimed that any of their possessions was their own, but they shared everything that they had. With great power, the apostles continued to testify to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and God's grace was so powerfully at work in them all that there were no needy persons among them. That's very important. There were no needy persons among them. Remember that one of the major focuses of the New Testament is the poor. Okay, the victims, poor victims. Jesus said, "Blessed are the meek. Blessed are those who blah blah blah. Blessed are those that let other people step all over them." This is a main focus of Christian teaching, and you'll understand why it's there as we continue. So with great power, the apostles continued to testify to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and God's grace was so powerfully at work in them all that there were no needy persons among them. Let me read the whole thing before I start tearing everything apart. For from time to time, those who owned land or houses sold them, brought the money from the sales and put it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to anyone who had need. Joseph, a Levite from Cyprus, whom the apostles called Barnabas, which means son of encouragement, sold a field he had owned and brought the money and put it at the apostles' feet. Now, a man named Ananias, together with his wife Sapphira, also sold a piece of property. With his wife's full knowledge, he kept back part of the money for himself, but brought the rest and put it at the apostles' feet. Then Peter said, Ananias, how is it that Satan has so filled your heart that you have lied to the Holy Spirit and have kept for yourself some of the money you received for the land? Didn't it belong to you before it was sold, and after it was sold, wasn't the money at your disposal? What made you think of doing such a thing? You have not lied just to human beings, but to God." When Ananias heard this, he fell down and died, and great fear seized all who heard what had happened. Then some young men came forward, wrapped up his body, and carried him out and buried him. About 3 hours later, his wife came in, not knowing what had happened. Peter asked her, "Tell me, is this the price you and Ananias got for the land?" "Yes," she said, "that is the price." Peter said to her, "How could you conspire to test the Spirit of the Lord? Listen, the feet of the men who buried your husband are at the door, and they will carry you out also." At that moment she fell down at his feet and died. Then young men came in, finding her dead, carried her out and buried her beside her husband. Great fear seized the whole church and all who heard about these events. So, all right, hang on a second here. I'm going to do a little fascism myself. Okay, all right. So, that's very clear. Now, what is in here that you don't, this is interesting because I remember hearing this as a kid in church. This came up in all the time about testing God and lying to God and all of that. And it just never dawned on me what the real lesson was, because what they wanted to talk about was, just another way of guilting and control and lying to God, that God is watching everything that you think, that you can't even think anything bad or wrong, which is a way to control you again. Because one of the main, biggest, most destructive things that I find working with clients that I also have gone through is that our modern society tells us we are not allowed to have negative feelings. That if you have sadness, anger especially, pain, any kind of negative feeling, you are seen as unspiritual. Definitely, anger is the worst. Because what is anger? Anger is an emotion that comes up when you feel threatened. When you feel threatened, you're driving down the road and somebody cuts you off, you get angry and you flip them off, and then ideally after about 30 seconds you relax and you go, "I'm glad I didn't get in an accident," and then you forget about it. But in that moment, the anger that comes up is there to protect you from a potential threat. So one of the ways to keep people from becoming individuals and creating their own life and getting out of the state or the religion or society, doing something outside of that, is to control their feelings and make them feel guilty for having anger. And this has come up in the New Age idea. That, and I run into this all the time with a lot of New Age people who will, I don't go down to that lower level. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not here saying that you should live on rage. Resentment is something that needs to be worked through. But this is what happens when you stuff anger down. It becomes unconscious rage, and then it becomes a resentment that you live with, and then you are forced. Your own anger becomes the vehicle through which you are forced into becoming a slave. Because when you do not acknowledge your anger, when you do not acknowledge your unprocessed rage, your only option is to adopt the mindset of a victim. This is, by the way, why there's so many people who smoke marijuana. One of the things that THC does, and I'm not talking about some of the other things in cannabis, but one of the things that THC does is it, as you know, if you've done it, it puts you in this placid state. It throws you into your intellect, and your intellect is a way to avoid your emotions. But what I've found is that people like chronic THC users are among the most resentful and angry people. They put on this fake spiritual, I'm at peace with everything, I'm at one with everything, and at some point, if you hang out with them, they will have a flash of anger, and they'll explode on you. And that's because THC attacks the liver, and the liver is what protects you. And when your liver is under attack, this is why when you smoke weed, you get paranoid. Because when your liver is under attack, it seeks to find out who's attacking you. This is why people drink as well. You don't realize this. People like alcoholics who drink a lot, they're angry, right? They're angry people, especially when they drink, they get really angry. It's because their liver is under attack. Now, they drink for the same reasons, because they can't deal with the rage that they feel, and they want to medicate it. And it goes straight into their liver, and then you end up having the opposite. But it does give them that initial feeling. This is another thing. Like, in case you're somebody who drinks a lot and you don't understand why people who aren't drinking don't want to be around you, it's because you don't understand that you've lost all of your boundaries. This is why people end up, sleeping with strangers when they drink. We think it's because they lose their inhibitions, but what happens is it destroys their boundaries, because the liver energetically creates your boundaries. And so when your boundaries are gone, you notice that drunk people, they don't talk to you in normal, they don't give you your normal space. They get right into your face. Even if they're smiling and, thinking that they're happy. And your experience is what? Get the fuck away from me. Back off. Give me my space. And they get into their personal space. Anyway, I don't know why I got off on that, but all right, hang on one second. Okay, so I guess I'll just go in and get to the questions. I'll tell you now before I get at it, I'm not going to get into politics. It's not what this is about. I'm not going to get into religion bashing, other than analyzing how Christianity has affected us and affected our mindset. Other than that, I'm not going to get into any of that. So I know that that's going to bum some people up. We'll see here. All right, so let me take a look and see where the questions are. Ryan Coyne question: Karl Marx called religion the opiate of the masses. Do you think this is an apt description of Christianity? Of course it is, but he was doing that to achieve the same effect as Christianity. Politics is the opiate of the masses now, for sure. Fox News, InfoWars, Rush Limbaugh. Do you consider this news? Rush Limbaugh, go listen to Rush Limbaugh. Does he ever talk news? No. He spouts his opinion. He states facts. So-and-so is so-and-so. So-and-so is this, that. It is opinion. It's not even journalism. It's opinion. Fox News it's interesting. You go and watch like normal mainstream news, right? Which, by the way, in case you don't know, mainstream news, there are journalists that have to, by law, back up their reporting. They could go to jail for not, if you're a journalist, you can go to jail for not, giving out accurate reporting that you can back up. Because if you mention somebody's name, somebody said this and somebody did that and somebody did this, you have to back it up. Opinion journalism, you can say whatever the hell you want. This is why when you try and talk to somebody who watches only opinion journalism, you can't actually have a discussion with them about what actually happened. Because they're so emotionally attached to whatever it is, And I'm using the word communism. You notice I haven't used the word socialism. Communism and socialism aren't necessarily the same thing. Now, I'm not saying that one's better than the other, or one's right or wrong or good or bad. But what opinion journalism has done is fuse the two so that if you throw out the word socialist, you automatically associate it with communism. And communism is bad, right? So this is what I mean. Politics has definitely become the opiate of the masses, meaning it gets you intoxicated. Karl Marx was talking about something else, but it achieves the same thing, because when you are intoxicated, whether it's in your rage or in your fear or in your emotion or in your devotion or in your trying to subjugate yourself to the will of God, you're caught up in the frenzy of the feeling of, like in those born-again Christian churches where you see the people crying and they're trying to wash the ceiling with their hands. Thank you, Jesus. That kind of intoxication makes you very easy to control. And that's what religion was designed to do. It was designed to control you so that those in power could then expand their empire. And empires are designed for one thing. Empires are not about world domination. Empires are about resources. And so you have people who live in the city who originally were the elites. So if you want to go back, this is again why history starts with, when you go to learn history, you don't learn about what your ancestors were doing 1,000 years ago or 3,000 years ago, because you don't know, nobody cares about that. You go back and you learn the beginning of civilization. And specifically, like with the Greeks, what happened is you had people who wanted to increase their resources, grain specifically, food. And they started conquering the people around them and enslaving them, and then taking those slaves and still having them bring to the cities, the Greek city-states, inside the walls of the city, the resources, the grain, the whatever the resources were. And when those resources start to run out, then they start to conquer other lands around them. And the people in the cities are the elites. They don't go out and farm. They don't do anything. Maybe they will go out and become generals and go out and fight wars. But they don't go out and do any labor. So the conquering of people is to get labor so that the labor will then harvest the resources and bring them back to the elites in the city. And these are the civilized people. Civilized means within a city. So civilization means to live within a city-state, where the people in the city-state send people out to conquer people, which means take their resources, including slaves. Slaves become resources because they're what? They're labor, right? And then when you talk about Western civilization, what you hear is this religious fervor about how advanced we are as a civilization. But you can't have that without there being elites who are profiting from the labor and the resources of people they've conquered. And they use the idea of civilization as the excuse. Rome was seen as a beacon on a hill, a city of light. And when people would go out and conquer the barbarians, the justification for the elites within Rome who didn't farm, who used slave labor and got their resources from these barbarians, is that they were bringing the light of civilization to the darkened barbarians. It's the same exact justification that was used when Europeans colonized the New World. And the same justification that was used to enslave people of color, which is that, yes, they're slaves, but at least now they have the gospel, right? It's the same idea. So I'm answering your question about was Karl Marx right? Is religion the opiate of the masses? Of course it is. But nowadays, the opiate of the masses is politics. The fervor behind politics is the opiate of the masses now. And it is very easy to control you when you are drunk in your emotional ecstasy or fury. Angry people especially, because what is anger? Anger comes from a need to protect yourself from a perceived threat. Angry people are frightened people. And when somebody is frightened, first off, when you're in fear, you cannot use your higher brain. You cannot think critically. Critical thinking means that you acknowledge and you analyze your own emotions and you say, do I have an emotional agenda here that is clouding my ability to see the objective facts? That's the first thing that a critical thinker does. And this can't happen if you are in fear. So guaranteed, if you're watching me and you are somebody who gets angry when you watch the news, whichever news it is, I don't care if it's state-run Fox Media or if it's the fake news, I don't care what it is. If you get riled up emotionally and you get angry, you are operating from fear, which means that you cannot think critically, which means you are being controlled. And this is what Christianity is designed to do. And I want to get into, let's do that now, before I go any further. So what got me thinking about this and got me realize this was that, and I think I've mentioned this a couple of times already lately, but I was talking with a client, and it was a client that was having difficulty taking action on their soul desire. Now, this is pretty much what we all go through. This is why this is nothing unusual, so I'm not talking about anybody specifically here. But this person was having difficulty taking action on their soul desire. And they knew what it was. We had already determined what it was that they wanted. And it frightened them to go after what it is they truly wanted, which is normal. That happens almost every time. And we had already decided what the actions should be. Actually, they decided. I helped them decide what actions they should take to achieve what it is that they really wanted. And then there's, some space between sessions, and in that time, the fear comes in and the doubt comes in, and they change their mind or they alter it, and then they want to justify to me why they've changed their mind and why they're not going to go after it. And within that discussion came the idea of, well, I need a sign to show me what I'm supposed to do. And I said, you've got the sign already. The sign was when we were talking 3 weeks ago, and you felt empowered. Again, I'm paraphrasing, so please, if anybody's listening, I'm not talking about any specific individual. The time that you were given the sign was when you became really excited, and you felt empowered, and you felt like you could go after what you wanted and you could achieve it. That's your sign. Your sign is the joy that comes up and the excitement that comes up about going after what you want. And then you're supposed to take action. You're not supposed to be waiting for a sign after that. But when you go into doubt, you want a sign. You want God to give you a postcard in the mail saying, you are supposed to go to 575 First, whatever, Main Street, and go up to the 3rd floor, knock on the door, like in the Matrix, right? You want somebody on the cell phone telling you, okay, turn left, duck here, go out left, which is one of the reasons people like the Matrix so much, is because somebody will tell them what they're supposed to do so they can escape. It's another reason people who love the Matrix, they don't realize it, but they are absolutely following the Christian blueprint. Because in the Matrix, you're looking for the pill that you can swallow, which will then start a process and save you, and you'll wake up, and you'll no longer be, and then some flying machine will come and pull you out. You're wanting to be saved. It's no different from Jesus saving your soul. No different. I'm laying the groundwork for what doesn't work. We are going to later talk about what does work. And it is totally antithetical to what we have been force-fed, and then what we've become addicted to. Okay, so I kind of lost what I was saying. But I started thinking about this idea of needing to be given a sign, the idea of needing to be told what to do. What is it that I'm meant to do? Listen to the phrasing there. I just want to know what I'm meant to do. Nowhere in that phrase is somebody saying, what is it that I want to do? They don't ask that question. They want to be told what they're meant to do. What is it that's God's will? What does God want me to do? This is why the Matrix is so popular. And as I was thinking about it, it reminded me of a friend of mine who's, I think, a second or third generation German guy. And he was going back to what is now, what used to be communist East Germany. And he was working for some company and training people to do something. I don't know what it was. But he came back saying, it was, and this was long after, that part of Germany became unified and it was no longer communist. But he came back saying that people in those districts, man, they just can't wipe their ass without somebody telling them what to do. They don't have any self-determination to do anything. They want somebody. They don't know how to function without somebody telling them what to do. And I started thinking about that, and I thought about communism, what communism does, and the whole point of it, and the state, and you're just, just a cog in a wheel. You're not allowed to have an identity, and how, the oppressiveness. Like one of the things that communism will do for the laborers is it will make you work, crazy hours, like 16, 18 hours a day, and you're so tired you can't do anything. You can't fight the regime when you haven't had enough sleep. You just want to get home and go to bed. And it just destroys your individuality, right? We could say the same about capitalism in a lot of ways. But our ancestors had a completely different version of how the universe worked. And for this, I'm going to share with you the story of how, I've been talking about this a lot, but it's really resonating with me. And this is how England was founded way back when, 300 AD or whatever it was. Really long time ago. So if you have watched any King Arthur movies, if you have enjoyed, forgive me, I'm going to step on some toes, if you have enjoyed things like Wiccan or Celtic, any Celtic New Age spirituality, you probably read a lot of Arthurian romance. A lot of Druids do, because unfortunately we don't have very much understanding of what the Druids really believed and taught. And so we go the next best thing, which is middle age stuff. And so the Arthurian romance novels, because that's what they were, by the way. There's no history in the Arthurian story, none. The Arthurian story is a romance novel. It's a dime novel. It's something people read for excitement. It was invented in the Middle Ages by some French guy. It's got nothing to do with actual history, just to let you know that. But if you have read these, you have this belief that there were these polytheist British Celtic people who were finally released from the yoke of Rome. And then out of nowhere came these barbarian Anglo-Saxon hordes that came in and started destroying and raping and pillaging and stealing land. And this is what we believe. I believed it. For many years, I thought I was of Celtic descent. And I used that. I used that story to fortify my own victim mentality. I had tremendous racist feelings toward anything Germanic. I thought, I didn't really consciously think it, but after watching, in the 60s, there was a lot of World War II movies and things like that, and Hogan's Heroes. And so for me, anybody that was German was a Nazi. And they were the people that came in and destroyed my, ancestors' homeland. I believed that for the longest time. But that's not what happened. What happened is, according to the records that we have, and there's a lot of people who want to dispute this with me, but, this makes more sense. So way back in, I think it was 300 and something or other, or in the land of the Saxons, I believe it was in Saxony, Lower Germany, what you had polytheist people who lived on the land. They could only, the population could only get so big before they could no longer be self-sustaining with the resources that they had. And so this was common practice, was that when the population got to a certain level, there would be a call for volunteers of people to leave the village and go and, found another village or do something else, but we've got to reduce the population. And so this was customary. And so what young warriors would do to prove their worth and their valor is that they would choose to leave their homeland, their mothers, their fathers, their cousins, where they lived, and they would show their bravery and their selflessness by going out and becoming mercenaries. And they would get on ships and they would set off to who knows where. Maybe they had an idea where they were going, maybe they didn't. But what they wanted to do was to either conquer their own land somewhere, or they were going to put themselves into servitude to somebody else. The greatest thing that the Germanic warrior had was his troth, his vow. Truth isn't the same as it was back then. Troth meant the truth of your vow. You would vow something. I'm going to accomplish this. I'm going to do this. This is totally antithetical to the idea of waiting for God's will, waiting for some outside authority to tell you what you're supposed to do. They looked within themselves and they came up with what they were going to achieve for themselves. And here's another thing that's different from Christianity. In Christianity, God creates everything for his own glory. And if you ever were a Christian and you went to church, one of the things you're not allowed to do in Christianity is take credit for anything that you've done. If you create a masterpiece, you can't take credit and say, I created a masterpiece. You have to say, no, God God did it through me, and God did it for his own glory, and you wouldn't even sign your name to it because that is pride. The sin of pride is idolatry. Thou shalt have no other God before me. If you take credit for your own life, you then become God, and you're now an idolater, and God must destroy you. So you can't enjoy any of your own benefits or creations. You must turn the glory of it over to God. Right? That is completely antithetical to how our ancestors lived. So these two guys, that I didn't mention their names. Their names was Hengist and Horsa, which both mean horse. And these guys left their homeland and they brought with them other volunteers, other mercenaries, other soldiers, so that their families, their grandparents, their cousins, their mother, the girl that they were going to marry, but now they can't because they're leaving, that these people could live and be able to sustain themselves with the resources that were available to them on the land around them. They go off to create their own glory. This was important for the pre-Christian people. Each person was encouraged to create their own glory, to create a name for themselves and for their descendants, to create a name that would bring them glory. And the way that they would do that is they would make a vow to the gods. Totally, again, the opposite of what Christianity teaches you. Christianity teaches you that you wait for God to tell you what to do and then you give him all the glory. The polytheist understanding is completely different. It says you find within yourself your own divinity, and then you create a name for yourself and you vow to the gods that I will bring glory to my name. And you call upon the power of the gods to be able to go and create your world, your reality, and to do anything less than that was not looked upon with respect. I'm not going to say you were looked down upon, but, you weren't looked upon with respect if you were to, if you were to take these two and put them next to each other without any understanding, and some guy did some amazing thing and then turned over and gave the glory to God, the polytheist would be scratching his head like, what are you doing? A bunch of people just died for you to accomplish this. There's warriors all over the ground. Their blood is spilled on the ground, and you don't have the balls to take the glory for what you just accomplished? What about the guys who are still alive? That glory is theirs also. You're going to deny them that? What the hell is wrong with you? This is the difference in the mindset. So Hengist and Horsa go and they look for their glory. Now, they don't know what they're going to find. They're on their ship somewhere looking for someplace. And so they go and they hear, most likely, we don't know, but they probably hear that this Celtic guy, who's named Vordigan, is having difficulty keeping his kingdom together because the Romans have left, and he's being attacked by other Celtic tribes, and so he's losing all. So right, so these guys show up on the shores of Vordigan's castle, and they go in there. Now Vordigan is not a polytheist, druid, Celtic, um, pre-Christian shamanic practitioner. He is a Roman. His land has been occupied by Rome for 400 years, which is the same amount of time that the U.S. has been occupied by the Americans. Same amount of time. So you think about now, I mean, it's very hard now to think of the United States as being something other than what it is, an English-speaking former colony of England. Even though we've got all kinds of different races and cultures in here, it doesn't matter. Once you're in our culture, you can become part of our culture. Same with Rome. Rome was a globalist culture. Please don't give me any political crap about globalism. I don't want to go there. But Rome was the same way. If once you were in Rome, regardless of where you came from, you were a Roman. So Vordigan was a Roman and a Christian, and he identified as that. And he wanted to keep himself as part of the Roman Empire. And so in comes these Germanic barbarians who are seeking glory for themselves, but because of their code of honor, they are willing to give their troth to whomever they choose to be aligned with. So the idea in the polytheist idea is that when you give your troth to another chieftain, you are now part of that tribe. You now live and die. You will die for your chieftain, and you will give him glory and give him fame, and as a result, he will give you land and animals, and you can then carve out a life for yourself. Romans don't work like that. Now these guys don't know that. They show up and they say to Vordigan, "We are here to fight for you. And we will offer our troth to you. We will give our blood for you. In exchange, we want land and animals, and let us have access to women that we can marry. We want to have families and build a life. And if you give us that, we will become part of your tribe. We will no longer be Saxons. We will be Britons." So Vordigan doesn't live by that code of ethics, and Hengist and Horsa go and they destroy the enemies, and not only destroy their enemies, they go further and they say, "We can do even more," and they go up into northern England and into what is now Scotland, and they expand Vordigan's kingdom. People die. Good warriors have given their life for their new king, their new chieftain. And they come back and they've accomplished all this stuff. And in the meantime, Vordigan has gotten together with all the Christian elites, the Celtic Christian elites, who have said, "We don't want these unbelievers, these foreigners." Sound familiar? We don't want these foreigners who have a different religion on our land. So you got to get rid of them. No honor whatsoever. So they go back to Hengist and Horsa and say, "Hey, guys," Vordigan says, "Hey, guys, thank you so much. We appreciate everything you've done, but we really don't need you anymore. So, thanks. Can you go back home now because we don't need you?" Hengist and Horsa said, "What are you talking about? We can't go back home. We left so that they could survive. If we go back now, that is the highest of dishonor. We can't do that. You promised us something. You gave us our troth. Our people died. You promised us land." And that's when the fight for Britain becomes. And then the Saxons hear about it, and they hear about this Christian Roman. Remember that the Romans had been taking them slaves, enslaving them for 400 years. They hear about this, and all this ancestral anger comes to the surface, and then everybody comes down. Because the Vordigan and the Celtic people, the Christian Celtic Roman people, had no honor. And in that mindset, they didn't deserve to live. And that's how England was created. Now, that is completely different from the idea of Christianity, which says you wait for God to tell you what to do, or the Crusades, where they go down into lands that are already occupied by people. And by the way, do you want to know why Muslims hate Christians so much? Do you want to know why that is? Do you know that they call us crusaders, Westerners? Now, if you don't understand what the Crusades were, that's not going to make any sense to you. They still remember that. They remember these Christian colonizers in the name of their God coming down and slaughtering and destroying and taking land away from people who'd been living there for hundreds of years. You don't think they're gonna hold on to that resentment? But because moderners are so uneducated in history, they're so clueless and ignorant of their own history, they don't understand how they have pissed off the rest of the world. All they know is that one day some people came from somewhere and started attacking us, and we call them terrorists, which of course they are. But no understanding of how we have played a part in that, and how our culture has played a part in that. So this is probably going to piss everybody off. Everything I'm saying is probably going to piss everybody off. All right, so we'll talk more about this. Let's keep going. All right. Let's take a look at questions here. All right, so yeah, a lot of people. So again, if you're new to the channel, I'm getting kind of late on this, please ask a question. This is a Q&A. This is not a free-for-all, just throw out your opinion and let's throw opinions out there. I only want to read the questions. So I am going to start getting more, with things like this. If we get a lot of people coming in just talking, I'm going to mute you because I only want to respond to people's questions. Ghost in the Machine question. The Matrix trilogy asserts that the problem is choice. How do we handle encountering the architect of our own matrix? Well, first off, you're talking about a movie. It's a movie. I know that a lot of people out there want to believe that we actually live in a matrix and that we live in a computer program. And it appeals to us because people actually, I've watched it now. I've just now turned 55. And I've watched at least 2 generations of people come up who've been completely raised by electronic devices and the internet. They don't remember a time when there wasn't an internet. I do. I remember a time when you had to pick up a phone and dial, the dial tone and dial. And then somebody on the other end had to pick up the phone. If they didn't pick up the phone, it would just ring forever. We didn't even have machines. We didn't even have, messaging machines. You couldn't leave a message for somebody. Hi, is Dave there? Oh, he's not. Can you send a message for him? And we would have notepads next to the phone. We would write down, Dave, John called. There's a party at so-and-so's house. And if you didn't get and pick up that note, you didn't get that message. There's at least 2 generations of people who don't know what that's like. So they live in a matrix. It's true. They live in a matrix. But you're asking me a question about a movie. It's just a movie. We relate to it because it symbolizes how we feel. It doesn't represent reality. It is not true mythology. It's very close, but not quite. All right, so again, I don't want other people talking back and forth. Hang on a sec. All right. Ghost in the Machine question. The Matrix trilogy asserts that the problem is choice. How do we handle encountering? You are the architect. What do you mean? You are the architect of your matrix. If you want to look at it, you have to encounter yourself. The question was, how do we handle encountering the architect of our own matrix? You are the architect. This is what victims will never understand. People who believe in the matrix are victim mentality people. Again, as I said, the matrix is the modern version of Christianity. You want somebody to come and give you a magic pill and save you from your sins. In this case, save you from being trapped in the illusion. Because you have no power, because those above you, we don't know who they are, the false beings of light, are sucking the life force out of you. You live in a cruel, arbitrary, heartless universe. Christians lived in a cruel, arbitrary, heartless universe that was lorded over by Satan. Satan was the Lord of the earth, and you lived on the earth, and Satan was your Lord, and you were doing an act of rebellion against Satan by worshiping Jesus and asking Jesus to save you. Now, Jesus isn't going to save you. He'll take your sins away, but you've got to toil in this hell and this muck until you die, and then you get to go to heaven. What a horrifically arbitrary, cruel world that is. Same with those who believe in the Matrix. You believe in an arbitrary, cruel world, turns you into a victim. So you are the architect of your own matrix. Again, looking for the questions. Yeah, see, so I knew this was going to happen when I did this. All right, so I don't see any more questions here. Those of you, if you're new and you want to ask a question, please write the word question and then write an honest question, not a rhetorical question or an argumentative question. I see a couple here. And I will answer that. So let me see if I can see a couple in here that actually look like questions. Have you ever considered reverting to Islam and worshiping the one and only God? Not even going to bother answering that. Jim Francis. So Jim, if you want to ask a question, put question so I can see it. So we are our own God or gods, correct? Yes. How can you be your own God? All says you didn't create yourself. That is your assumption. Can you prove that? I can prove, if I know you and I ask you enough questions, I can prove how you created your own reality. You created the misery in your life, the circumstances of your life based on your choices. How does that not make you a God of your immediate reality? God didn't make any choices for you. You, according to Abrahamic religion, which is Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, you are given free will. So even that says that you have your own choices. So of course you create yourself. You don't know. You don't know what you've done or what you haven't done. That's a belief you have chosen to believe, which creates a basis of assumptions, and then your obvious resulting belief is you didn't create yourself. But that's an assumption. How do you know that? You know that because somebody told you that, you accepted it, and now you believe it. You can choose to believe something else. And if you follow that and you start looking after that, you will find the truth in that. Question, have you ever considered Islam? I mean, again, you're asking me that. Of course not. I reject all monotheism for the very reasons I've been talking about. So if you're coming on here because you saw me writing Christianity is communism, and you want to come and you want to talk about Islam, I'm going to say the same kinds of things about Islam. The reason why I don't make videos about Islam and Judaism is because that's not my experience, and I don't talk about things I don't have personal experience in. But just at looking at it, it comes from the same root. If you want to talk about where they came from, we could do that. It's going to piss a lot of people off, but that's a whole other subject. So of course not. I consider it a false religion the same way I consider Christianity and Judaism to be a false religion. Or any other religion that seeks to take away my power. And now let's talk about this. If I say that a Christian is going to call me an atheist, because they're going to say that I'm taking my power as opposed to God. That is an assumption. So let's talk about assumptions again. Everything you believe and most of your actions, if not all of your actions, are based upon assumptions that you carry around. For instance, you assume that there is this law of gravity, and if you step off a cliff, you will fall to your death. That happens to be, in my experience, a very helpful assumption because I have seen that in practice. So you tend to avoid stepping off of high places because your assumption is you're going to fall down and hurt yourself. Your belief is that there is one God who has created the world and that you are not it. That is an assumption, but you don't know that to be true. If you create that assumption that you are a tiny creation and that there's this thing outside of you, call it God or Allah or whatever, that has created you, then you are going to find ways to justify that assumption. Because here's what happens. This is extremely important. When you adopt an assumption, especially an illogical assumption, you need to be emotionally attached to it in order to preserve it. Because if you're not emotionally attached to your assumption, then any evidence that comes in to take you away from that is a threat. There is only one God, and God has created all people. That is an assumption. Now, if you go through life and your experience, your everyday experience starts to give you a different feeling, then all of a sudden your belief is in jeopardy. Now, if you live in a community that says you are a good person because you believe the same way that I do, which is, I mean, if you want to talk about Islam, the word Islam means I surrender. And why do they say I surrender? Because Islamic warriors, just like Christians, conquer lands and put their knives to people's throat and say, convert. And they say, Islam, Islam, Islam. I surrender, I surrender. Anyway. So if you buy into an assumption, you have an emotional attachment to it, which means you have to do things like go out and put guns to people's heads or put knives to people's throats. Listen, Christians did the same thing. They did the same thing to my ancestors. If you've heard about the massacre of Verdun, I'll write it down, look it up. Look up the massacre of Verdun. Christian Franks, who had recently, and by recent I mean within the past few hundred years at that time, had converted to Christianity. They were also polytheist, shamanic people, and they converted to Christianity. The king, Charlemagne, had decided that he wanted to further his territory. There were these Saxons who lived north of his territory. And these Saxons were not Christians, but they wanted to be part of Charlemagne's empire because when you're part of the empire, then you can sell and you can prosper financially. They wanted to be part of that, but they didn't want to give up their indigenous religion. The belief in Thor, the belief in Odin, the belief in Freyja and Frey, and the gods of their ancestors that they had believed in for tens of thousands of years. They didn't want to give that up. Charlemagne, however, wanted to use Christianity as a way to control people because it's a brilliant way of controlling people. And so he demanded that they convert, and they rebelled. And now the Charlemagne had these Saxon polytheist people who were fierce warriors, and they were fighting this civil war. He didn't like that. So he called a peace meeting. Now, in indigenous Northern European culture, just like when you watch movies now, we glorify it when like whatever it is, you see some Native American guy and they go to a peace meeting and then the white guy betrays them and then enslaves them and massacres them and destroys them. Same thing was true. The Romans did the same thing. Charlemagne was now operating like a Roman Christian. He was no longer operating like an indigenous European. And so he sent out a peace meeting to all of the Saxon chieftains. Now, in Saxon pre-Christian polytheist society, it was the ultimate sign of cowardice and dishonor to show up to a peace meeting with arms. So you left your swords and your axes back, in your village. and you maybe brought one person with you to represent your tribe or your village. And it was done at a sacred place. This is why in pre-Christian Northern European society, you did not bring weapons into the temple. The word ve, you know, the gods Odin, Vili, and ve. Ve comes from the same root word as Vishnu. If you know anything about Vishnu, he is the heart center who represents preservation, which means expansion, boundaries. Vishnu represents the Savior God because he preserves. It's the Ve. That was the same word. The temple was the Ve. It was the heart center of the people. You do not bring sharp objects to a heart. You poke it and it bleeds and you die. You left your swords in the village. You went into the Ve without any swords, and then you had out your argument. Whoever you were at war with at a peace meeting, you could sit across a table and you could argue to your heart's content and scream and yell as long as you didn't pull out your sword and kill people. And if you were somewhere else, you would. You'd pull out your sword and kill them because you couldn't stand what they were saying. But in the Ve, in the heart, in the sacred space, in the temple, you cannot do that. And Charlemagne knew this because he was descended from Frankish warriors who themselves were once Germanic polytheist people. And he went to those peace meetings and brought his arms and put knives to their neck and said, convert to Christianity or die. And some of them were going to get killed. We're going to kill you, so believe in Jesus now. And it says that the rivers ran red with blood. And of course, they took over that territory. So I don't make any distinction between Islam and Christianity. They do the same thing. They put the knife to your neck and you're supposed to say, Islam, Islam, I surrender, I surrender. I surrender to your religion, I surrender to your rule, I give up my identity, I give up my authenticity, I give up my indigenous way of belief, I give up my connection to my ancestors, I give it all, don't kill me, Islam, Islam. So yes, I have considered Islam, and that's my belief about it. Having said that, I am not one of these people that are now shaking their fist. I am not into the whole anti-Islam thing. I have known people, and I do know people who are extremely loyal, faithful, trustworthy, beautiful, wonderful, loving, giving people who happen to be Muslim. So this isn't a religious thing. I have nothing against people practicing their own religion. But if you want to sit down with me and analyze what those religions believe, if I believe it to be true and you want to hear it, I will be happy to show you how your religion is taking away your power. But if you don't ask me, I won't tell you. It's none of my business if you don't ask me. That's why I only respond to questions. If you honestly ask for my opinion, I'll give it to you. If you want to argue with me, I've got other things to do. All right, so let's go back and see if we can find out the questions here. Somebody says I'm missing the questions, so let's back up and see if I can find them. Ghost in the Machine question. Again, I'm not going to take any political questions. Isn't fascism a method to achieving a state structure and not a state structure itself? I don't fucking care. You know, I don't care. Let's see, what else? John Burnham question. Do you think communism and spirituality being at battle is what puts the masses into a spectrum based on mortality? Your question is too smart for me. I don't get it. It's too intellectual. I don't get it. So I have no idea. I'll try and read it again, but it sounds like you're so lost in your... maybe I'm just too stupid. I can't figure it out. Question, do you think communism and spirituality being at battle is what puts the masses into a spectrum based on mortality versus morality? Honestly, truly, I have no idea what you're asking me. Maybe you're 10 times smarter than me, but I don't get it. J. Deus Machina says, a better question to phrase is, how Christians live in a democracy when they believe in a monarchy? Well, they don't believe in a monarchy. This is the thing. If you read Acts, I read it earlier, so if you go back and watch it after it's been archived, Acts 5, I think it's 5, 32 through 5 and 6 or something, anyway, where Christianity is communism. And it's not only communism, it's if you don't give all of your money to us, God will kill you. Not only that, if you hold on to some of your money and you don't tell the religious leaders how much money you have, God will kill you then too. So it's a perfect setup for give us all your money or God will kill you. It's not even taxes. It is just the ultimate, and it says that nobody, here's what I was going to do earlier. I wanted to talk about it and I wanted to get through it and I didn't want to get sidetracked. So let's go back to it. This is Acts, I think it's 532 or 33. Okay, here it is, 533. With great power, listen to this. It's an if-then sentence. If this and this happens, then such and such. It's an assumption. Remember what I said about assumptions. Everything you believe is based on an assumption. You have to accept an assumption. And what I'm telling you now is an assumption. You have to accept an assumption in order to have a belief, in order to take action. So here it says, with great power, the apostles continued to testify to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus. And God's grace was so powerful at work in them all that there were no needy persons among them. So here you're being sidetracked. It's a sleight of hand. It's a magic trick. You're given sleight of hand here. The sleight of hand is that it says, the assumption is that with God's grace, if you accept God's grace, you will have no need. And God's grace was so powerful at work in them all that there were no needy persons among them. Now, they don't go in to the fact that they had just said that everybody gave all of their money and their property and that nobody owned anything, that it was all communal. Right? I'll go back, 33. 32. All the believers were one in heart and mind. No one claimed that any of their possessions were their own. Now, what's in here? All the believers were one in heart and mind. That is an if-then. It says, if you give yourself over emotionally and mentally to the group, then you won't need possessions. You will want to give everything away to everybody. And they shared everything that they had. All the believers were one in heart and mind. They shared everything they had. This is trying to bring people into a cult mentality. This works because what is it that people want most? All humans want one thing more than anything else, and that is to be loved. We are in one in heart and mind. Here's the interesting part. Have you ever heard people say this? Have you ever heard people say, I just want to be loved for who I am? Have you ever said that? I just want to be loved for who I am? Unfortunately, the only relationship where one is loved just because they exist is the mother-child relationship. Mothers are designed to love their children. They're just these blobs of nothing. They don't have a personality. They can't do anything. They just shit. They can't even eat. You have to force feed them. You have to put their face to your breast, and then they learn how to suckle. So they can't do anything for themselves. They offer nothing. But mothers are designed to love their children unconditionally. They see them as life, pure life, and they love that life so much that they give of themselves to them and that they love them unconditionally. That's the only relationship in where just existing you will be loved. Any of you listening to me right now, if you think that, and I've thought it, so I'm not judging you, if you think that I wish I could find somebody who just loved me for who I was, it means you did not get enough love from your parents. And you are still that wounded infant. This is why when children are loved healthily, and very few are, those that are have no problem going out and getting the life that they want and owning it and being proud of what they achieve. And they don't have a problem if people come at them and if people criticize them, they go, I wonder what's wrong with that guy. Well, I know who I am. I'm going to go get what I want. In here, this is, bear in mind when this was written. This was written in 200 AD. This was written during the time when the Roman Empire was conquering people, taking away their identity, taking away their traditional connection to their ancestors. They had no sense of self, and they felt lost, and they wanted to be loved. And now this is where the Gnostic influence comes in, because this is what Gnosticism is all about. Those of you listening to me who think that Gnosticism is the true Christianity, Gnosticism is nothing but victim mentality. Because Gnosticism says that the world is bad and the world is evil and the demiurge is bad and evil, but the true God, way above all of that, is true, but we have to fight against the demiurge. You still want your mommy to pick you up and hold you and love you. That's why you believe the earth is so miserable and horrible, and that's why you buy into all this and you smoke weed and you go, because you still want to be loved. That's what all that is about. And here's where the Gnosticism comes in. All the believers were one in heart and mind. We all loved each other. It didn't matter who you were. You go to church, right? And there's that crazy person that sits out in front with their eyes like this. Welcome, praise the Lord. You're all welcome here. God loves you. Really? God loves me? Because you can't love yourself. God loves me. Jesus, come into my heart. I was there. I'm not judging you. I was there. I did it. I know exactly what, when I read that, I know what my little, 8 or 10-year-old or 12-year-old mind did when I read that. This is communism. But it's even worse, because communism, the political structure, is the cynical version of Christianity. That's why it's atheist. Now here I'm going to share with you, I've made a video about it, search for it on my channel. Atheists are closet monotheists. So, by the way, are devil worshippers. People who worship Satan or Lucifer are also closet monotheists. Now what happens, little kids, when they don't get what they want? I hate you. An atheist is somebody who has come to believe that God doesn't love them. They consciously say there is no God. Look at all the cruelty. Isn't that the first thing they say? The first thing they don't talk about science. The first thing they say is they talk about how cruel the universe is. If God existed, meaning if there was somebody in control of us, then why is there all this misery in the world? There must not be a God. I'm an atheist. Now, it never enters their mind to believe in a different God, right? It never enters their mind, which means they're monotheists. They still believe in Jehovah, they just don't like him. They don't trust him. So they pretend he's not there. I don't believe in you. It's a little kid having a temper tantrum. Because if it wasn't, then they would go, well, that Jehovah God seems like a real asshole. And that whole assumption of he created everything doesn't look right, because there's a lot of people who seem to have a lot of problems and these weird things happen. So if he created everything, then why is there all this chaos? Instead of saying, I wonder if there is another spiritual explanation for it. As it so happens, there is. But you don't find these people in shamanic, indigenous cultures or religions. You do find them in places like India and China, but those are going to be people who are educated, which means they've adopted the Western intellectual mindset. Because there is an explanation for the things that we experience as painful challenges. It's called karma. Our ancestors in Northern Europe called it weird. And Weird says that there are three giantesses who weave the fates of human beings, and each of them represent what we perceive to be linear time, which is an illusion. The past, origins. From origins, we have the present, which is ever unfolding now. And then you have the future, which is debt, karma. So karma is the third part of Weird, which is debt, which means that the actions that you take, the beliefs and the assumptions that you choose right now in this moment create a past, which creates a future that you must live out. You create it. There is a God and it's you. So when you choose to disbelieve in a God, you're disbelieving in your own existence. Boy, I'm really on a tear today. I don't know where this is coming from. All right, so let's see if there's any more questions here. So I'll try and go back. Trying to go back because apparently I've missed some questions, and that's why I delete people who are just babbling, because I can't find the questions when you do that. I know that you have a wonderful opinion. All right, here's a guy. We're going to get rid of this dude right here. So if you say something like, if you curse, you automatically get hidden by YouTube. But when you say things like this to me, I'm not even going to repeat it. This guy goes bye-bye. He can watch the channel, but he can never comment again. I am the fascist here. This is a fascist channel, and I have control over who says what. Okay, let's go. Let's get rid of this guy too. He's just being an idiot. Jack Kaufman, hello. I have a question. Karl Marx once said that okay. Yeah. This must be a thing. You know, whenever I do a subject that I know is going to get a lot of people that are new to the channel, this is a thing where this must be fun, but it's really childish. But anyway, you have no use to me, so I delete your existence. All right, let's see what else. Ghost in the Machine. So again, this looks, I'll read it and then I'll comment. Question, if Christianity is communism, then, so whenever you ask a question like that, first off, that's not an honest question. I haven't even looked at the rest of it. Maybe I'm wrong. Whenever you ask an if-then question, you're not asking me because you want my opinion. You're trying to first force feed your assumption onto me. So that's your assumption. If Christianity is communism, which is what I said, then you're going to try to get me into your mindset, but you're going to do it in the form of a question. If Christianity is communism, then what is capitalism and why do Christians seem to prefer it? All right, so I was wrong. I take it back. It's a worthwhile question. I accept your question. Well, capitalism is fascism light. Because capitalism is not really free market for everybody. That is, by the way, one of the lies that is told to you by state-run media. That capitalism is freedom for everybody. Now that is something we like. We like that idea. I love that idea. But what is happening when it's sleight of hand. They give you this capitalism is for everybody. Everybody makes money and freedom to make money. But what they're doing behind the scenes is that they're trying to get rid of regulations. They, meaning the rich, the giant corporations, the Koch brothers. If you don't know who they are, go check them out. Especially those of you who are fans of state-run media. Koch brothers. Go look them up. Those are the guys that are setting your agenda for right-wing conservative. These are the guys that created, I was going to talk about this. These are the guys that created family values. Now, a lot of you are going to be too young to know where this came from. In the 80s, in the 1980s, during the Reagan years, Reagan fucked us, by the way. You guys worship him if you're, Republicans, but you have no idea how badly he put us into debt. He created a credit card government that took us so deeply into debt. That's why it's been taking us so long to come out of it. And then Clinton, for some reason, people hate his guts because he got head in the Oval Office. Congratulations. I'm glad, I'm sorry that Hillary Clinton didn't like it, but I don't give a shit where you get your sexual pleasure. Everybody should enjoy sex. If you want to get it in the Oval Office, that's fine with me. Just because he did that, all of a sudden people hate him, but he balanced the fucking budget and he gave us a surplus. And if you want to talk about it's the economy and you want to bag, the left for economy and you don't acknowledge that, then you are an idiot. You are at the very least ignorant and uneducated. But that's why that was such a big deal. In the 90s, the reason why him balancing the budget and creating a surplus was such a big deal is because Reagan created this huge debt because he bought everything on credit. That is what that's what capitalism wants to be now. You have these giant corporations who, like the Koch brothers, you'd be amazed at all the stuff they create all over the world. We wouldn't be able to function. Toilet paper, everything you can imagine, they've got their hands in. Now, in order for them to make a lot of money, they don't want to be hindered on, making sure they don't put poisons in the air and poisons in the water and those kinds of things. They don't want people to unionize and all that kind of stuff, because if they do, then they don't make as many trillions of dollars per year. So they use their money to buy politicians who will pass legislation who will allow them to avoid or eradicate laws which are meant to keep your children from drinking poison out of their school drinking water. You may not like that. I know a lot of you have been hypnotized and you have the opiate of the masses today, which is state-run media. And you are all infuriated over those damn socialists and the damn, foreigners and all that. And it's sleight of hand. While you're wrapped up in your emotional fervor and all that, these elites who you say you are against are stealing everything from you. And they own the government. If you don't think that they own the Republican Party, unfortunately, my friends, you are not educated. Probably going to lose a lot of subscribers over this, but you either want the truth or you don't. That's the truth. So capitalism, Christians seem to prefer it because modern day Christians, you have to know the history of it, modern day Christians come from the Reformation, which was happened in the Germanic areas, which makes sense because that was the last part of Europe that was conquered by Rome. So they never really became part of the Roman Empire. So they never adopted, they still had, even though they adopted Christianity, they still had underneath that the Germanic individualist polytheist mindset. And so they rebelled against the idea of a pope, which was a Roman emperor. They rebelled against the idea of being controlled, and they wanted to control their own lives. This is where the Germanic work ethic and all of that. So, capitalism came from the still underlying pre-Christian individualist mentality that was pasted over by Christianity. So true Christianity is like a lot like the Catholic religion, which is very much you buy into it and you accept it. It's said in Latin. I know you don't understand it, but just buy into it anyway, and don't read the Bible in your own native language or we'll slay you and we'll kill you, right? It's about control. Christianity was about control. So what they've done is they still adopt it and they want to have control, but it's now control of the elites. So the elites who have the money, which is like in the United States, you want to talk about freedom and you want to talk about, how great this country was. And I have a lot of things about this country that I love, but it was not a free country 400 years ago. If you were not a white male landowner, you could not vote. And if you're a white male landowner, guess what kind of things you're going to vote in? The things that are going to make you more money, right? And obviously wasn't free because they had slaves, they had natives that they were, killing and enslaving and, whatever. So it obviously, the whole idea that we're all free, they obviously didn't believe that. It's true if, for me, I want all of me and mine to have that, right? So let's cut the bullshit. The capitalism still, and if I had to pick one, I would pick capitalism because I like making money. I like the freedom to make money. So I like that. And like most people, I don't like to pay taxes. I like to make money and have my own stuff. But capitalism is, it's fascism light. And I'm not even using fascism with any judgment. I'm just telling you it's a lower version of that. That's why you have capitalists tend towards fascism, whereas others tend toward socialism. And by the way, those of you who hate the word socialism, do you have a social security card? Do you get any social security benefits? Do you get any benefits as a veteran? Do you drive your car on paved streets? Do your children go to public schools? When there's a fire, do the fire engines come down your street and put out the fire? If you have a heart attack, do the EMTs come up and give you mouth to mouth and try and get you to the hospital and save your life? These are all socialist institutions. You pay taxes, and those taxes pay for these services. So people have to fucking wake up. All right? The guys that are watching state-run media who think socialism is bad and everything on the left is bad, they don't even know what the hell they're upset about or what it is. They can't tell you specifically unless they've heard it on Rush Limbaugh, what they're supposed to know. Right? So, socialism has its place as well. It's not the same as communism. However, communism is socialism taken to the extreme. Fascism is capitalism taken to the extreme. So have I successfully pissed everybody off now? Everybody in your own little group, have I now sliced you up and pissed you off? I hope so. I hope that you will take that and critically analyze your emotional attachments to these words and these beliefs. I hope you will learn to think for yourself and not let anybody tell you what to think or what to believe. That's how our ancestors lived. All right, let's see. Let's go back here, see if I missed any questions here. Sorry, I have to go back because I have all these idiots that I had to delete their questions. All right, now I'm up to. So Ko Young Cook, if you have a question, please write question so I can answer it. And I'm not going to answer that question because I don't know enough about it. Dean Nevins, question, is there a connection between Parashurama and Thor? They both combat negativity in similar ways. Parashurama is Rama with an axe. So Parashurama fought against the military elite. We could call it the military industrial complex. Parashurama was a deity, which in mythology, we don't know if he was a real person or not. He was Vishnu incarnate, and he was a priest who was also a warrior, and he went and slaughtered all of the military elites because they were fighting against and destroying and killing the priests, the priestly sect. And Thunar is the god who protects human beings. So Thor is definitely somebody who protects the rights. Definitely Thor is the god of boundaries. And Thor fights to protect your boundaries of all kinds, emotional, and somebody could invoke Thor if they were fighting for their land. Absolutely, because Thor is the god of boundaries. Parashurama, so they have that in common. Parashurama is Vishnu, which is Ve, which is once again protection, which is boundaries. I don't personally see them as identical, but do they have things in common? Absolutely. Absolutely. Parashurama is connected to the planet Venus. So he really represents, even though he represents fighting against Mars. So Mars is warfare. So this is all symbolic. This is Venus in Vedic astrology. In case you're interested, you can go to astrology.thunderwizard.com. You can get a Vedic astrological reading, and I can show you, all kinds of fun things I won't get into. But Parashurama represents Venus. Venus is love. Venus is beauty, is friendship. So Venus represents when two people, among other things, when two people are fighting, when they come together, they say, bring it on in, and they give each other a hug, and they become friends again. That's Venus. Venus is libations, which is why when you have two people who are fighting, you say, hey, why don't we just sit down and let's have a beer together. The beer is Venus, because a beer in small quantities kind of calms you down and makes you feel happy. That's Venus. So Parashurama goes and fights against and destroys Mars out of control, which is, just killing and destroying, but it's symbolic. It means that when you empower Venus, you use Venus to calm Mars down. That's why guys who are like me right now, guys who are single tend to be a lot more aggressive. Guys who are in relationships tend to be pea-whipped. They're calm. They're more docile. It's because Venus, love, sex, has calmed them down. So this is what that means. So Thor, it represents mainly Jupiter, but he is the combination of Jupiter, Jupiter, Mars, and the Sun. He's a combination of all those. But he's primarily Jupiter, which is spirituality. So they connect that way. But anyway, there is some difference. Parashurama is Venus, Thor is Jupiter, but they do represent protection of boundaries, for sure. All right. Ghost in the Machine question. Oh, I already answered that one. All right, so now I'm getting back to some of the other questions I've looked at. Okay, so Nathan Johnson question, which direction would you place Freya in the Thunder Wheel? So that I'm sure I've dealt with numerous times, but Freya is Venus. So where would you place Venus? In the southeast. Interestingly enough, Frey we put in the northwest because Frey is the lord of the elves who are in the northwest. So both Frey and Freyja are both the power of Venus. One is Venus, Frey, and Freyja is the power of Venus, the Shakti of Venus. But if we're going to get really technical, we put them opposite each other. And Frey, who is the lord of Freyja, his sister/wife, we put him above him so that he looks down at that. That's a big, long thing. But generally speaking, the short answer to your question is we put Freyja in the southeast. Question, is there... question, is there a name for the capitalism that truly serves us? I've always called the Koch doctrine corporatism. I don't know. I don't have a name for it. I think I understand where you're coming from, but I don't have a name for it. Zach T question, Thorstein is my translated last name. What does that mean? If I understand it, it means the stone of Thor. So maybe one of your ancestors was born under a mountain of Thor. I don't know. I could be wrong, but I think it means the stone of Thor. Richard Bullard question, does shamanic animism have a specific economic political philosophy? Well, let's look at that. How did shamanic people live? They lived in direct connection to their physical resources. If you started this late, go back and watch it from the beginning. And I talk briefly, and I've done it in other videos as well, about the history of civilization, which is the history of empires, which is the history of learning how to live out of connection to your resources. That is all that empires are. Empires allow you to live without being directly connected to your resources. So when you live in direct connection to your resources, like if we go back, 50,000 years to the first modern humans, they didn't have land that they owned. They didn't have that. The world was enormous. There were so few people in the world. They followed the herds. The only thing they cared about was having food. So they followed the herds. So they didn't have a place that they lived. They didn't have a political structure the way we understand it. They had a spiritual structure and those kinds of things, but it was all based on practical reality, things that worked, how to survive in this powerful natural world that we live in. So you're asking me that question. The only reason we start creating politics is when we get shoved into little areas and when there's too many people for so many resources. Then we start creating politics, which creates rules for people how to gain access to resources. Let's talk about armies. Our ancestors, our shamanic ancestors didn't have armies. They were warriors, but they were hunters first. So fighting wars was just an offshoot of being a hunter. A hunter had to be able to go and kill food and protect themselves from big, nasty Ice Age animals. You took that, and if you had to fight against your neighbor for whatever reason, you took those same skills, you shot arrows into them or you threw axes at them. It was the same thing you would do to fight animals. But then you have the creation of empires, which is people decide, or this is how empires started, by the way, which is why Western civilization classes start with the breadbasket, which is Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia became the birthplace of empires for what reason? Because they started learning how to farm grain on a massive scale. Because when the ice ages receded, you had all these floodplains that then became really great places to grow crops. And now instead of, gathering crops here or having a small garden or whatever, now you had these huge, giant, endless fields of grain. And so they were like, wow, we got all this grain. And then you had to do something with the grain because normally you just picked and ate what you needed. But now you have more grain than you could possibly eat, so you got to do something with it. So you put them in first maybe some jars, and then you put them in big jars, and then you start putting them in silos, and then all of a sudden, all the other tribes around you who are hunter-gatherers are like, wow, look at all the grain those guys have. What are we doing? Let's go get their grain. They got more than what they need, so they start stealing grain. Then in order to protect your grain, because this is our grain, you can't have any of our grain, this is ours, go get your own, you create armies. So the armies are stationed around your grain, and then in order to protect the grain, then you build walls around your city, and then you build these giant castles and people live on top of each other, and then you bring in the livestock, you bring in the sheep and the goats and the pigs and the chickens, which, by the way, did you know that your cold and your flu is a result of chickens and pigs and geese being put together? They're not supposed to be put together. Every time, the reason why every year the flu is different is because it comes from other places. We call it the Asian flu or whatever. But at some point, bird flu, which we are normally resistant to, we're immune to that. And as long as birds are by themselves, we don't get it. But when you put birds next to pigs, pigs have similar DNA as humans. The pigs get the bird flu. It mutates into a form that is communicable to humans. This is why living in cities is unnatural. We're not meant for it. Because, again, you put the pigs and the chickens inside the bottom of the castle, and the people live at the top of the castle. They're no longer their feet aren't even on the ground anymore. They're not harvesting their grains. The army is protecting the grains. and the army is the lower class, and then they go out and they conquer the people around them, and then those people become the farmers, and the army becomes the slave masters over the people they've just conquered, and then they run out of resources and they keep conquering and conquering, and their army gets bigger and bigger, and the slaves get more and more, and the people inside get sicker and sicker, and they get new diseases. Do you see how this all comes together? Do you see it? This is why when Europeans came to the New World, we didn't have to take armies to slaughter. The vast majority of the natives who died from disease because they had no immunity to things like the flu, which we got because we were living in unnatural, unsanitary conditions where diseases that animals had that didn't normally come to us would go through different species until it found a way to get into humans. So our ancestors lived in direct connection to the land around them. They didn't need politics. Their politics was, that's why they worshiped nature, because nature gave them everything. That's why our ancestors were animists and polytheists. And that's why the further away you get from animism and polytheism, the further away you get from shamanism. Do you see it? Is it coming together? You're making the connections? Okay. All right, so what else? See if there are any more questions here. What is the best astrology system to study? Vordic? That's probably, spell check probably changed it from Vedic to Vordic. I don't know what the best is. I practice Vedic astrology, astrology.thunderwizard.com. I teach that, and it is the most effective for me. I could go into it, but if you want to find out, go onto my channel. Let me repeat myself again. In order to get the most out of my channel, you have to watch my videos. In order to watch my videos, you need to know how to search within my YouTube channel. There's a lot of people out there who think they know how to search YouTube and they don't. They type in at the top search bar, they type in something and it takes you to 50,000 other different channels. You think you're trying to get into my channel, but then they take you to some other channel. So whatever device you're using, I know how to do it on a desktop. I don't know how to do it on a laptop or on a phone, so don't ask me, but figure out how to do that. Search within my channel and type in Vedic astrology and you will find out why Vedic astrology, in my experience, is more practical. And then if you want a reading from me, you can go to astrology.thunderwizard.com. Jedi Black Knight question, are there Qigong exercises when fighting cold and flu? My suggestion is just to let the cold do its thing. Because your energy is going inward to fight the virus. And when you do Qigong, you're expanding your energy out. So I know maybe some people might say something different, and I remember reading something about how to do Qigong to end a cold. And, the thing about colds and flu is that part of the reason why you get so sick, like have you ever noticed, like you'll have two people who are around it and some people don't get the flu, and then some people do, but they only get it mildly, and then some people get really sick and they're just like green gobs of hell are coming out of their head. The people who get the most sick are the most toxic. So, sometimes when you get the flu, it just means you're really toxic. You've been eating a lot of cheese. That snot is all the cheese you've been eating. That's why I don't do dairy. So when you have a cold and flu, just let your body heal itself and do all those normal things. I wouldn't try to use Qigong for it. Kingslayer 44 question, is there a deity that you know of that represents the mushroom fungi? No. Number one is because if you're talking about hallucinogens, I don't do hallucinogens, and I don't recommend that people do hallucinogens. And the reason for that is because hallucinogens, there's a place for them, but the most powerful and the most sophisticated and the most evolved energy practices have done away with hallucinogens. The Vedics used to use hallucinogens. The soma drink of Indra, used to be this hallucinogenic concoction. Probably had cannabis and some other stimulants and some other things. Then the herbs were put in front of the moon at certain times, and mantras were chanted over them. So they had power. And because that there was such a religious and spiritual ritual surrounding it, the hallucinogens, the poisonous chemicals in it, were empowered in such a way that it wouldn't cause as much harm to the person. But the Vedics gave up hallucinogens because they discovered deep, powerful Kundalini yoga, and they found that they could achieve the same states and go to the same levels of spirituality without that stuff. Same with the Taoists. The most powerful, in my experience, the most powerful energy magical practices are from the Taoists, and they don't use any hallucinogens. And they will tell you, if you go to a traditional Chinese medicine, especially like if you ask them about THC, they will tell you how THC saps you of your energy and gets you stuck in your head and takes away your virility. And they won't judge it. They use it in very small doses for certain illnesses. There's a reason. If you want the energy body to flare up and fight off something or balance it, there's a purpose for it. See what I mean? All of these things have a reason for it. So I don't know if there's a deity for that. And if I did, that's not what I do. If because you say I use the word shaman that you think that I do that, I don't. Let me disavow you of that. I recommend, if you want to follow what I teach, that you do the exercises that I teach and that you give up all of that stuff. I respect it. It has its place, but there are things that are more effective than hallucinogens. So, next question. Self-elevation question. Could you explain the fundamental differences between Shiva and Rudra? Rudra represents the lower self, correct? Or activation of the lower self to the higher self? Question mark. I would have to think about the assumption that you've made. Rudra represents the lower self. I don't know that to be true. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. Rudra is Mars. So Shiva, Shiva has the ability to, like Vishnu, Shiva can be associated with all of the planets. One of the aspects of Shiva that is related to Mars is Rudra. So Rudra is one of the earliest forms of Shiva in the Vedic. So if you want to say that Mars represents that, but at the same time, Kartikeya, which is also a Mars deity, represents complete, awareness and opening of the third eye. So I don't think that you can make that blanket assumption. I could be wrong. I wouldn't. I would simply look at them as Rudra represents Mars. Shiva, in and of himself, Shiva, just that part of Shiva, which means, I forget what the word is, but he would represent the northeast, which is Jupiter, the ether element. So you could say that ether element is the highest awareness, the higher mind. Rudra is Mars, probably. So I guess I can't find anything wrong with what you said. And if I were to think about it, maybe I would find that to be true. But for me, that's too... I resist at this point putting him into those categories like that. But I can't find anything wrong with your logic. So you could be right about that. All right. Jim Francis, question. Do we keep coming back to Earth if the lessons missed aren't learned? So Jim Francis, welcome to the channel. I get the feeling that you're new to the channel. Please watch my videos. I talk a lot about what brings us back. If you want to know a quick answer, go onto my channel and look for The Shamanic Secret Commandment to a Perfect Life. I also have a book. You can go to michaelwilliamdenny.com and look for that book. That is why we keep coming back. It's because you haven't fulfilled all of your desires. When you fulfill all of your desires, you will stop coming back. All of your karma, the karma we think are sins. Again, Christianity's done a number on us we equate karma with sins. There is no such thing as sin, as the Christians will say it. Sin means missing the mark. Now, if you believe in a God up there, then you're missing his mark and he's pissed off at you. If you're God and you missed the mark, then you missed your own mark. And so you choose to go back and do it again because you missed it. Man, I really wanted to do that thing, and crap, I got scared and I didn't do what I wanted to do. Can I go back? I'm going back. I want to get that right. I want to experience that. All of your challenges, if you understood that all of your challenges are signposts, and I don't care how horrible they are. If you're born with no legs, it's a signpost. I'll give you an example. Who's the scientist? He's dead now. He just died. The guy, black hole guy. What's his name? Anyway, I can't think when I get into this mindset. I can't remember things like names. Maybe I am getting old. But somebody will remind me of the guy. The guy was in a wheelchair who couldn't talk. That guy was born with some seriously fucked up shit that destroyed his physical body and his ability to function. But it pushed him in a direction of the mind. He could think. His mind, his brilliant mind, was unaffected as far as I know. And he continued to write books and come up with theories because his challenge pointed him in the direction of, listen, in this life, you want to figure out the secrets of the universe. So you don't need your body. If you have your body, you're going to be distracted. You're going to choose to give yourself a limitation that will point you in the direction of your greatest joy. And from what I saw, he was a happy guy. I'm sure it wasn't easy having what he had, so don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that he was doing cartwheels having his disease, but it pointed him in the direction of his greatest strength. Your challenges, your karma, your sins, the universe is doing it to me, God did it to me. If you understand that those are signposts, your limitations are pushing you in one direction. Am I ready to talk about this yet? I have lived in multiple places in the United States, and I have had a bucket list. Among my bucket list was that I wanted to live near the mountains. And for some reason, when I was a kid, not a kid, like when I was 20-something, I loved mountains. This is when I backpacked in the Sierras. And I hated living in the city. Los Angeles is one of the biggest cities in the world, and I don't like big cities. I don't feel good in them. And I didn't like it, so I went to the mountains as often as I could, and I backpacked in nature. And one day I was watching a movie, and it was this guy in Idaho, and he was driving through these mountains, and I started weeping, and I said, I want to live there. Sure enough, when I was 39, life created a situation, and I ran away from Los Angeles, and I moved to Idaho. And I lived in Boise, Idaho, and I went up to the mountains in my truck, and I could drive on forest roads for hundreds of miles, and I didn't have to backpack, and I had all that. I ticked off that bucket list. And then I wanted to live in a cabin in the woods in the middle of the deepest, darkest forest, and I ended up getting divorced and moving and living in a cabin at the end of a dirt road. And there was a sign that said, National Forest beyond this point, grizzly bears and blah, 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 and bald eagles and elk and moose. And, the last, in the lower 48, the last mountain range that had the full contingency of wild animals that used to be all over. I lived in that, and I ticked that box off. And now I'm ticking off the box of I want to surf for the rest of my life. I live in a stretch of beach, that's my beach is probably 2 miles long, from Manhattan Beach Pier to El Segundo jetty. That's my beach. And go, up pretty much, I'm 3 blocks away. I'm about as far away from the ocean as I want to be. You take me out of that little zone and I'm not very happy. It's the last place in the United States that I want to live. And if I lose that, there's only one place to go, out into the ocean, because that's my love. My love is the ocean. And I'll just say it out here. I haven't completely nailed everything down yet, but I'm probably going to move to Australia. Because that is what California used to be. You get out of the cities of Australia and you have just endless beaches for miles and miles, beautiful surf. That's what I remember California used to being in the 70s. I remember driving down Pacific Coast Highway and camping. I remember Baja California. You could drive into Mexico and just drive down Baja California beaches and surf. You can't do that anymore. And it's so crowded here now. This is the only beach I know of that I can go out and surf and not have to deal with a bunch of people on my back. So that's a limitation. And if I listen to that limitation, and if I'm honest with myself, there are some things that make me unhappy here in California in the United States. That's one place left for me to go. So I'm listening to that. That limitation is pointing me in a direction, and I'm listening to it. I could sit here and complain, and I can complain about how crowded it is. I can complain about the smog. I can complain about how expensive it is. I could do all that, or I could do something about it. So your limitations are trying to tell you something. Listen to them. Let them point you in the direction that you're supposed to go. I don't know how I got on that, but it was based on somebody's question. It was, do we keep coming back if the lessons aren't learned? It's not the lessons. It's your desires. Kingslayer 44. Stephen Hawking's. That's who the guy is. Yeah, Stephen Hawking's. All right. I sighed because I was about to read a question. Then when somebody says something, the thing jumps up. Kingslayer, question. Can you elaborate your opinion on what being in the moment means? Is being in this mindset? So get rid of the idea of mindset. That is your intellect trying to take you out of your immediate situation. Mindset means, thinking. The intellect is not the mind, by the way. So being in the moment means having all of your feelings right now. You're asking me the question like many people do, which is the false Buddhist. I mean that saying that there is a real Buddhism and then there's a false Buddhism, which 99% of the world follows false Buddhism. They don't know what real Buddhism is. False Buddhism says, if I can think myself into peace, then I will be enlightened. Being in the moment means having all of your feelings, positive and negative. I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm happy, I love you, I hate you. Having all of your feelings and acting in consciousness, which means you don't let your feelings tell you what to do, unlike those who watch state-run media. They get so infuriated, they see the word socialism, and they don't understand what it means, and then they go and who am I supposed to hate now? I'm supposed to hate that politician? I hate those fuckers. That's one way of not living in the moment. You let your emotions dictate your actions, dictate your beliefs. Living in the moment is having all of your feelings and feeling them. Like wanting to die because you're so upset or so angry or so lonely or so horny or whatever. And feeling all those feelings and then taking action based on your highest awareness. That has very little to do with the intellect. The intellect is something else. I won't get into it. Looking for the questions. Asaur question. Does the spread of Christianity have to do with the removal of the mother principle? Of course. Because I talk about this in the book. Odin says Jesus was a coward. Go read that book. You can go to michaelwilliamdenny.com and get it. Go onto Amazon, type in Odin says Jesus was a coward. You can also go on my channel and type in Odin says Jesus was a coward. Stuff will come up about it. I talk about that. That started with Judaism. I mean, it happened in other places, but Judaism was a response to the Jewish people who by then, at that time, there was a separation between Judah and Samaria. This is reality. But the Jewish people at that time were polytheists, and they worshipped the mother god, earth, and they worshipped the father, sky father. They worshipped a fertility goddess. You can see this in the archaeological record. Right up until the Babylonian captivity, the average Jewish person was worshiping multiple gods. They weren't just worshiping Jehovah. Jehovah was the state God, this God of the state of Israel, who was worshipped by the priests and the elite. And the elite were the priests who ran the country. And of course, since they were the elites, they worshiped the God of the state, which was Jehovah. So what ended up happening was, because the Jewish people had been living for 400 years under the yoke of they didn't go to Egypt, but they were a vassal of the Egyptian state, of the Babylonians and the Sumerians and the Phoenicians and the whomever. They'd been living as vassals, paying taxes to all of these. They weren't occupied, but they were controlled by these other countries for so long. They were losing their culture, they were losing their identity, and so they reacted to that by being very jingoistic. And so the worship of Jehovah became more important. Then they decided not to pay the Babylonians their tax. The Babylonians said, "What the fuck?" And they came down with their armies, and because Jehovah was the symbol of the independence of the Jewish people, they razed the Jewish temple, which put out the flame to Jehovah. They believed that as long as the flame to Jehovah was there, that Jehovah would protect them from invaders. When their temple and their flame went out, they were taken off into captive. The elites who were behind it, not the average people, the elites, the priests and the politicians, were taken into captivity and changed into Babylon. And they sat there in Babylon in chains and went, "What the fuck just happened? You said, priest, that Jehovah, as long as we kept his flame there, that we would be safe. And then you said that he would protect us and we didn't have to pay taxes. What the hell happened?" And they went, Jehovah's obviously angry with us. He must be a jealous God. That's it. We're worshiping all these other gods, and he wants us to worship the state God only. And you know what? People have been worshiping those other gods that these people around us worship, and we've tolerated that, but we're losing our identity. So they created the false mythology of Moses coming out of Egypt. Egypt represented Babylon. It did not represent Egypt. So Moses freeing the children of Israel from the bondage of Egypt was a metaphor for the elites saving the Jewish people from the bondage of the Babylonians. And that's why it was during that time that they co-opted, they hijacked the flood myth, all of that stuff. They borrowed from the Babylonian religion to create the mythology of the Jewish religion, which is completely made up. Before the time of the Babylonian captivity, that religion didn't exist. So I'm answering your question about the removal of the mother principle. So the mother god was part of the pagan, the other people, the poor people worship the mother god, which is what paganism always represents, the uneducated and the country dwellers. So paganism and heathenism mean the same thing. It means country bumpkin. It means uneducated polytheist who lives in the country. That's what it means. That's why I don't associate with pagan or heathenism, because I'm educated and I know what I'm talking about, and I'm not an idiot. I'm not a redneck. So for those people who are proud to be called pagans, what you're saying is I'm an uneducated idiot. So I don't use that word. So those who worshiped the mother principle were seen as lower class. They were also people who didn't give a crap about politics, and they would intermarry with the surrounding people, and they would bring in other gods because it worked, and they eradicated all of it. And that's why in the archaeological record, right after the Babylonian captivity, you see no altars in the home. You only have worship in the temple by the priests, who are controlling everything. Do you see this? Can you make the connection? This is your mentality that's been shoved down your throat. That's why we live with a bunch of slaves and a bunch of victims. This is why. It started with that. The Jews did it for their own self-preservation. I can understand the mindset. They felt besieged on all sides by all these different ethnicities and cultures and people, and they were losing what they felt was important, and so they changed it around. They changed it, the elites changed it, and they probably thought they were doing the right thing. Just like people now who think that American jingoism and getting rid of all the Mexicans and whoever that were saving our country, they think they're doing it for the right reasons. And I'll tell you, the majority of people who believe that are people who live in white-only neighborhoods. I know this from personal experience. I've lived in the hood here. I lived in Carson, which is sort of the hood, right next to Compton, in a totally multicultural, multilingual society. And those were the best neighbors I've ever had in my life. They were the kindest, most respectful. I loved living there in that. I mean, I didn't like living in the city, but in terms of that, I felt more at home there than I did when I've lived in some really rich, all-white neighborhoods, and I did not feel comfortable there. I did not feel, people got pissed off if you parked, in front of their giant 2-acre house. If you parked on the edge of their, I mean, literally this happened. Some people came to me and wrote a note and put it on my windshield and said, "Don't park in front of my house." There's no other fucking cars. What the hell's wrong with you? When you live in that kind of a neighborhood like I did in Carson, everybody makes room for each other, and you're parking next to somebody there. And then, hey, you want to park in my driveway? Hey, we're having a barbecue. Do you want to come over? Hey, this is so-and-so, and he's from this country, and is that from that country? So that whole bullshit about, we have to protect our way of life, those are from the idiots, the pagans, the uneducated idiots who live in isolated things, who are afraid of what they don't understand. This is what the Jews were doing. This is what the elites were doing. It worked so well that the Romans co-opted it. They tried to fight against it, and then they saw, man, the people that we're having the hardest time fighting against are those Jews, man. We can't seem to put those guys down. And so their belief system, that's why they created Christianity. The modern form, not the Gnostic form. The modern form of Christianity was created because they saw that these pesky Jews were going off of this Old Testament. What if we create the Messiah they keep talking about, but he's a Messiah who pays his taxes? Give unto God what is God, and give unto Caesar what is Caesar's. That verse was for the rebel Jews who weren't paying their taxes. It's what that's all about. Can you see it? Do you see it? All right. Ray Bass, question. What is Jesus' connection to reincarnation? None. Jesus never existed. Go on my channel and look for that. Did Jesus ever exist? Jesus never existed. He has no connection to reincarnation whatsoever. Jesus is a mythological, spiritual thing. He's the extension of that jingoist, nonsense. All right, so guys who are new to the channel, I'm going to put you, if you don't write question and you just dump your opinion, I don't want your opinion, I only want your questions. So, all right, one question here. If you want a question, please write question. Otherwise, I can miss it because I have to bypass all the people who I'm trying not to, who are dumping their opinion. Do you believe Jesus is a symbol of the sun or the star? I believe Jesus could be a symbol of the sun, but again, Jesus never existed. I believe that I could get into all that. I don't want to do that right now. All right, I'm going to take a break. Probably going to be done because I've already been yapping my head off for 2.5 hours. I'm losing my voice. I'm going to take a break and I'll come back, and if there are any more questions, I'll take them. right, I'm back. Okay, so I'll check, see if there's any more questions. I am running out of steam here, though, so this might be the last. Yeah, okay, no more questions. So I didn't spend a lot of time promoting myself, but go and check out all of these links here. If you want to learn shamanism from the ground up, go to thunderwizard.com. That's also the best way to support this. Well, I'm not going to say the best way. That is a very good way to support this channel. If you want to support this work that I'm doing, you want me to have more time to just put out information, videos, books, stuff like that, go and subscribe at thunderwizard.com. You'll get access to private videos which will teach you shamanism from the ground up. I teach you about shamanism, ritual, runes, energy work, mantra, shamanic journeying, all that kind of stuff. Qigong.thunderwizard.com. If you want to know the most powerful energy practice I have ever come across that can be taught publicly, go to qigong.thunderwizard.com and practice that. If michaelwilliamdenny.com, let's see, and astrology.thunderwizard.com. I won't get into that, but look up. Let's see, what else do we got here? Runereadings.thunderwizard.com if you want a rune reading, a 9-world rune reading, which I find to be an excellent way of getting a snapshot of where you're at on all 9 levels of your being. Get a rune reading from me. Transformation.thunderwizard.com is another great where I can give you a 9-world rune reading and a Vedic astrological reading and a North Star astrological reading for the year. And then astrology.thunderwizard.com. Okay, so that's it. That's all the plugging I'm going to do. All right, that's it for me. Thank you, guys. Thanks for listening. Boy, I was really on a tear today, wasn't I? All right. I will see you guys another time. Okay, talk to you later.